Let's get to it. So let's first do just your general summary of 2025. What are the biggest events and the consequences?
Well, the big overarching event is that America is in retreat, and I think this is the big story. I mean, there's flickers where things seem to be getting stronger,
Mhm.
but the Americans have suffered two very major reverses this year. The first one is in the world in the fields of trade and economics. I mean, they started the year widely convinced that they could put pressure on China
Mhm.
and they could put China back in what they believe is box. In other words, there's a
Mhm.
cheap labor source for American manufacturing and push China back. And we've had an economic war against China, which is what it is. The tariff war, the tariffs, I think it's become increasingly clear the global tariffs were ultimately about China. It
Mhm.
was all about China in the end
Mhm.
and about securing American economic dominance over China. We had sanctions against China because when the attempts to restrict technology, which have intensified over the course of this year, uh, we saw those too. And all of these attacks have been unsuccessful. So China demonstrated that it has this enormous leverage using rare earths. It proved the resilience of its economy
Mhm.
and the strength of its own mostly internal supply chains. And it also demonstrated that it is the technological equal of the United States. Now, this isn't something I think that Americans yet have fully digested, but before soon they will. I don't know whether you're aware of the fact there was a big article in the Financial Times, I believe,
Mhm.
which confirmed that China has built its first ultra light, whatever it is,
Yeah, ultralight, yeah,
lithography machine.
machines. Mhm.
Now, apparently, they managed to get people from ATML to help
Mhm.
them, which is
Mhm.
interesting because it
Yeah.
shows that the Dutch are using Chinese scientists. So so anyway, they got all of that. They made this first machine, which is apparently enormous. I mean, it's much bigger than the Dutch machines, but that's
Mhm.
usual when
Yeah.
you're
Mhm.
building a prototype. There's still work to do
Mhm.
in optics, but the Chinese are going to work out all
Yeah.
what needs to be worked out with optics. There are some people who are saying that it will take about until 2030 for China to start mass producing in big quantities the very high end chips. If it happens next year, I would not be surprised. I'm not predicting it will be next year. I think it'll be about in a year or two.
Mhm.
But they are moving forward fast and purposefully. So that has been one massive American defeat. It's the biggest defeat. It
Mhm.
is the biggest, most consequential defeat of all. Now, the second defeat that America has suffered in 2025 has been at the hands of Russia, and
Mhm.
it's been in Ukraine. So
Mhm.
I think it began to become clear well over a year ago that Russia was not going to be defeated in Ukraine. But I think there was an assumption that if the Americans came along with all their bribes and offers and all those
Mhm.
sorts of things, they'd be able to persuade the Russians to stop where they were. And they would be able to use that to leverage, to lever Russia away from China.
Mhm.
And I mean, this has been a fairly obvious
Mhm.
ploy
Mhm.
plan all along. I mean, Trump clearly believes it. The security strategy review ultimately shows it. It's always been about that at the end of the day.
Mhm.
And again, that plan failed. So the Russians refused to stop. They refused to compromise. They absorbed all the pressure that's been placed on them, and the pressure has never been anywhere near as strong as the Americans thought it would be. And the result is that they're entering 2026 looking very much as if they're on a winning place. So again, There's been blips and things.
Mm-hmm.
Just as with China, the Americans have done all kinds of things to annoy China. Fines on Chinese-built ships that enter
Mm-hmm.
American ports, all that kind of thing. There's been similar things with Russia, sanctions against Rosneft and Lukoil and all that. But none of this can disguise the reality that overall it's the Russians who have momentum and the Americans who are retreating. And the Americans have tried to conceal the fact that they've lost these two big geopolitical battles by putting on the usual performative dramas that they can in other places, Venezuela, the Middle East, wherever. But it's those two big events, China event, which is by far the more important, by the way, but Russia is not unimportant too. It's these two things that were the big events of 2025 and will shape the future. And we saw that at the very end of this year, the Americans produced their security strategy document, muddled and incoherent as it was, but nonetheless, it shows that there is, at least amongst some Americans, some dawning realization that their country is in retreat.
I think in 2025, I almost feel like it's a turning point. I think if we in the future looking at back, because before that everybody's was talking about the rise of China. I do feel like in 2025 China arrived officially, and it is partially due to this tariffs war, right? This fight between U.S. and China. I feel like just like any declining empire, I mean, when you're declining, it's better not to pick up a fight with anybody because you confirms that you are declining, isn't it?
That's
so
exactly,
2025 is like that, right?
That's exactly right. That's a very good way of putting it, actually. I mean, in fact, it's interesting that the expression, the rise of China or China rising, is no longer appears everywhere anyway. And it's precisely because of what you said. It's because China has arrived. I mean, it is impossible any longer for the United States to really pretend that it is superior to China. It believes itself to be China's equal, but not its superior anymore. So I think you're absolutely right. I mean, 2025 has been a pivotal year, and it will be one that historians will write about a lot.
Yeah. And that's partly probably explains why Trump is so desperate to want to have this war with Venezuela, right? It needs some kind of a victory, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
Not just Trump, though. I mean, this is the thing. I mean, the Americans want a display of power to prove to the world that they're still strong. So this is but you see, even Venezuela, it's not really translating it's not working exactly as they said it would, because Maduro hasn't run away. Venezuela is still there. They've imposed sea blockades, which involves seizing ships that were transporting oil to China. Notice that. That means it's Chinese oil, by the way, just to also say. But I mean, they've been doing all of that, but they haven't been able to press home. And this morning there were reports that they were about to seize another tanker, and the tanker raised the Russian flag. And at that point, the Americans backed off.
What we would talk more about that, the seizing the Chinese oil thing. One thing, actually, I also think it's important for 2025 is the Epstein case. Because domestically, right, we were talking about foreign policy wise, but these things connected. So domestically, I think the general public, they knew that the elites, the US elite, they were corrupt. It's nothing new. But the scale of the Epstein scandal and then the lanes that the Trump administration went to cover it up, I think crystallized people's idea that the whole group, this whole elite class, they are just totally corrupt. Like just the whole class.
On Epstein itself, you're absolutely correct. The general public has always had a sense that there's something very bad here. We've also had the delays in publication, which have first damaged the Democrats, but now have done catastrophic political damage to Trump himself. And that has hardened the view that, this is a terrible story. But now we are getting documented releases. We're getting photographs. We're getting emails. And the picture is, if possible, even worse for me than I had imagined. Now, we've already discussed all the emails, the fact that Epstein was able to conduct diplomacy as if he was, the leader of, a senior diplomat working for the United States, the Secretary of State even. I mean, it's incredible that he was involved in diplomacy to the extent that he was. But what I found even more revealing and ultimately even more shocking were the photographs. Now, the photographs show that Epstein made no effort to conceal his activities. In fact, he was utterly brazen about them. They are completely in your face. And you see all of these important people coming to his various homes and houses where all of this was going on. And there's now no possibility that they could pretend that they weren't aware that it was going on, because we see the pictures. We see the pictures on the walls. We see the apparatus that he had lying all over the place. And I mean, none of them, as far as I could see, or if any of them did, a very few of them seemed to have raised any protest, seemed to have told Epstein, this is impossible, I'm leaving, I'm going away now, or reported him as they should have done to the authorities. And we see plenty of examples. We see Bill Clinton in a tub with an unnamed woman. We see Prince Andrew, laid out on the laps of a whole lot of other women. I mean, it's disgusting. It is terrible, but it's sheer brazenness that I think gives the whole picture away. So everybody, I mean, I know a little bit about New York. Everybody of importance in New York must have known what this man was up to. And he was able to go on doing it year after year, decade after decade, wrecking lives, being the ghastly predator that he was. And nobody stands in his way. And at the same time, he's conducting diplomacy on behalf, apparently, of the United States. So all of the unanswered questions about him, how he made his money, how he was able, even with the money he had, to live this impossible lifestyle. All of those questions, the big questions, remain unanswered. In fact, they've grown even more pressing now that we've seen more about him. But we get the full ghastly sense of the extent and reach of his activities.
You see, when I was looking at his pictures, I feel like I probably was wrong to believe it. I have the same question. How can people now, knowing this, these people, continue to have contact with him, let alone participating in those horrible activities? Just even why would you have a friend like that, right? People like Larry Summers, I would think, But anyway, I have a new theory. I think actually he put out those pictures in his residence, that intentionally, like an advertisement to these people. Like, you can come to my island, to my place, to my world, doing things that you don't dare to do anywhere else. I think that's what he's doing, right?
Yes, if you've ever read the novels of the Marquis de Sade, late 18th century French philosophers, some people call them, you would know, you'd be familiar with all of this. I mean, that is exactly what I thought it was. It was it was opening the doors, inviting people. Look, this is where all your fantasies come true.
Yeah, that's what he's doing. Yes. Yeah. And there is somebody observed that his email kind of interesting. There's an author, his name is Anand Grihadas, an Indian guy. He wrote a book years ago, Winner Takes It All. And recently he had a conversation with Chris Hedges. So he said he actually spent the time, several days, to read all those emails. And one thing striking for him, he said, was they almost always started their email saying, "Hey, Jeffrey, where are you?" Or, "Hey, so and so, where are you?" And I'm, in London, I'm in Amsterdam, what have you. So he said these people collectively, they don't have connection to a community. They're just always out there somewhere. And so for them, if you don't have a community, then you don't have a stake. Whether this is community or this is a country, a location, you don't have a stake in
That
this.
is a very interesting point. That is a very, very interesting point. Yeah.
And that's what you guys talking about a lot about the globalist, right? You guys on the Derail talk a lot about the global. That's exactly what globalist is, in my view, isn't it?
Yes, it's exactly right. That is a very interesting point. I'm going to mention it to Alex actually. And we might sort of follow up on it. But that is a brilliant point, actually.
Yes, I agree. I find that so interesting. I also noticed they always ask you, "Hi, where are you?" I mean, I was like, these people, you never stay anywhere. You always asking each other. And they would say, "Okay, if you're close by, let's have a dinner or whatever, So I find that's also very interesting. So that's why the file, whatever, in there, it always give us some idea, give us some extra information about the elites, right? And
yes.
And maybe for that point alone, Trump reluctant to give it to us, maybe.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. I mean, he's clearly implicated in some level.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
he clearly knew more about what was going on than he ever let on. I mean, that's the most generous interpretation. It's probably the true one, actually.
Yeah.
But having said that, I mean, he's clearly very embarrassed by this affair, and I'm sure one of the things that's driving him is that a lot of the people who give him money, his donors, are probably heavily implicated themselves.
But at the end of the day, I don't think anybody will be prosecuted. So that's the sad part. And that's just continue to anger the public. That will.
Yes.
Yeah.
Same, absolutely. Same here.
Okay, let's continue to stay with the U.S.-China. So you just mentioned that U.S. took oil tanks from China. I mean, for one thing, it's pretty complicated. I mean, you as coming from a country with a big shipping industry, right, from Greece. So one of the ships that they took is called Skipper. It was carrying a Guana flag, but then it belongs to a company called the Triton Navigation Group that is based in Marshall Islands. But then it operates and managed by another company based in Nigeria, and then repair and maintenance in Singapore. I think in Singapore or maybe UAE. And insured, I guess, by some British company. So the shipping industry is extremely complex, isn't it?
To put it mildly, I mean, shell companies and fake identities are absolutely a part of this industry. I mean, I was only very peripherally involved in it, but I know enough about it, and I know a lot of people who were involved in it. And I mean, they are some of the most ruthless, some of those predatory, some of the most unsentimental people you will ever meet. And I mean, it is all about money. It is all about evading taxes and payments and whatever you can possibly do. And I mean, the people who do this, actually, I mean, you have to give it this to them. They do it well, and they do keep world trade flowing. I mean, if everybody stuck by the rules, then world trade would not work as smoothly as it does. I mean, that's the thing. That is the first thing to say. But this shell game of companies, which makes it very difficult to locate the identity of the real owner, is extremely common in this world. In fact, it's absolutely standard.
Yeah. But nonetheless, we know the cargoes, so those are oils that belong to China. I think the oil is coming from Venezuela and going to China, right?
Yes.
So that much we know. And
this is the single most important thing, by the way. I mean, the even more important than who owns the ship is who owns the cargo.
Yes.
If you have any background in maritime law, and I do a little, then you would know that the cargo is in fact more important than the ship. So it is seizing the cargo. I mean, that makes it brazen piracy. I mean, you stop a ship in the high seas, you search it, you harass the crew, you might have committed all kinds of crimes. But if you take the ship away and remove its cargo and keep the cargo for yourself, that is actually the crime of piracy. That is what 18th century pirates, the people, that's exactly what they did.
Yeah, that you no longer hear freedom of navigation anymore.
Yeah,
That's no
yeah,
longer
yeah.
interesting. But okay, so China does is doing something to retaliate. One of the things I don't see any reports about it is
Yeah.
actually China intercepted a cargo ship run by Evergreen, I think. It's a cargo
Oh,
machine, but they find weapons, supposedly HIMARS, that are heading to Taiwan. So this is
oh my goodness.
Evergreen is a Taiwanese company, and it's supposed to be a civilian cargo, ship. But China, I think China knew these things, right? So their postcard, they announced it. They just put out a list of the cargoes that they seized. Okay, and then in there they are HIMARS. I don't see any confirmation by the Western media, although that doesn't mean it's not true. I actually trust the Chinese media. But
I have no doubt that the Chinese media are telling the
yeah,
truth.
so I think this is one way China to retaliate. Okay, you seize my oil, I seize your weapon. I think this is one way. But this is not a very good development because overall it will getting this whole shipping industry getting less safe, right? If they
I
try to
think
do
this
this.
is a massive story. If it
Hmm.
was untrue, the United States and
Yeah,
Western governments would not only have denied it,
yeah.
but they would have said that these false stories are circulating in the media.
Hmm.
The fact that they're not publicly protesting
Yeah.
about it, and that there's clearly some word out to the media, do not report this story,
Hmm. Hmm.
demonstrates how incredibly sensitive it is. So
Yeah.
clearly, the United States has been arming Taiwan
Hmm.
covertly. So, I mean, we have all of the announcements of weapons that have been sent to Taiwan from the
Uh-huh.
United States, but we must now accept that there is a supplemental and secondary arms flow, probably much bigger, being conducted in secret. And in secret from not the Chinese government, which obviously will know all about this because they
Yeah.
have intelligence people all
Mm.
over Taiwan. Of that, I have no doubt. It has
Mm.
been kept secret from you and me
Yeah. Yeah.
and from the American people who do not know that we are arming Taiwan in
Mhm.
order, I say we because I'm sure Britain is also involved,
Yeah.
arming Taiwan, risking a war with direct clash with China, which will of course have enormous impact everywhere around the world. So that is one thing. That is a
Hmm.
very important part of this story. The second is the fact that China is now taking retaliatory action by seizing ships is unsurprising to
Hmm.
me,
Hmm.
but profoundly shocking for the West. Because,
Hmm.
of course, from the Western point of view, they have dominated the world's oceans. They assume that a sea blockade is something that they have a monopoly of. And now China is showing that that is wrong.
Yeah.
And China
Hmm.
can see ships just as easily as they can see ships if this is the kind of game they want to play. And bear in mind, all of this is happening against the backdrop of the Chinese Navy increasing its scale and size,
Hmm.
though showing no sign of wanting to be a global navy in the way that the US Navy
Yeah.
is,
Hmm.
and of the US Navy itself being in decline.
Hmm.
So in November, they cancelled the project of building Constellation frigates because that whole project was going completely wrong.
Hmm.
Donald Trump comes up with this farcical idea of building these colossal cruisers with their ray guns and their particle beam accelerators or whatever it is, which I don't think anybody takes seriously. Again, you can see the bluster and the bluff in all of this. But the Russians are now telling ships around the world, raise our flag and we will protect you. And the Russians, who do have a fleet, not as big as the
Hmm.
Chinese or the American, but they do have a fleet nonetheless, are now saying we will provide naval escorts. So you could see that this situation is becoming increasingly dangerous
Hmm.
and that China is taking action. And of course, any action Russia takes is
Yeah.
again going to be dwarfed by whatever action China takes.
Hmm. Well, if Trump's idea or the U.S. government's idea is the Monroe Doctrine, so they want to keep China, Russia, everybody out of South America, by seizing their cargo is only making the opposite, right? Then China
Mm.
and Russia, they will have to come in and protect their
Yeah,
goods. It's the
exactly.
opposite. that they're achieving.
Exactly. That is exactly right. I mean, if you want to have a situation where the Chinese Navy starts naval patrols in the Gulf of Mexico and the Pacific coastline of the Americas, well, then you're going about it the right way.
Yeah, exactly. Another thing China did is sanction the 20 U.S. Defense companies. But what's interesting is they actually sanctioned 10 individuals, high-level executives. And apparently the U.S. is caught U.S. off guard. They still think that is surprising. And their complaint was, you didn't tell us ahead of time. Why should China tell you ahead of time? And this goes back to what you said in the beginning. 2025 is a defining, turning point kind of a year, but they're still getting used to the idea. They haven't get used to the idea.
No, they haven't. No, absolutely not. I don't think they know how to. But you're absolutely right. Again, by the way, that story has not been reported in the British media. It's the first I've heard that China has taken some links. Action of this kind. No, absolutely. I'd be very interested.
Yeah, maybe I find more and more that the West, more and more things they don't report.
Yeah.
So in the future, I will probably send you more links. Okay.
Yes.
One thing also I noticed for this whole oil thing going on, the oil price hasn't gone up, which is kind of interesting. Now, can we say that OPEC, they used to control OPEC plus, they used to control 53% of the world oil supply, but now it's down to 46%.
Yes.
So OPEC plus influence on the oil market is also going down, is weakening.
Yes, it is. I mean, it is going down. And I mean, there's less consumption of oil than there was. And here, by the way, one of the major reasons is China's electrification. I mean, China used to be, was the main driver in recent years of oil price rises in the oil market. And now China is not using as much oil as it used to. Well, it's using as much, but I mean, the growth curve has slowed because China is moving towards new technologies. And so that's taken away some of the the heat out of the oil market. There is another factor, which is that starting at the beginning of this year, OPEC plus began to increase production. And the reason was that the Saudis, this is a very common thing that happens, by the way, with OPEC, the Saudis had pushed production curbs on all of the other OPEC members. The Saudis themselves observed these production cuts because they are the big swing producer. The other smaller producers, however, take advantage of the fact that the Saudis have cut production and that the oil price is rising in order to cheat on their quotas. The point comes when the Saudis say enough's enough, and they start to flood the world with oil in order to punish basically these smaller producers. So we've been going through that kind of cycle this year in which the Saudis have increased production. And the Russians, by the way, have also increased production. So there is currently an oil glut. There is an oil glut at the moment. And that is keeping prices soft. It's not going to last for very long because the iron rule of oil gluts is that they encourage overconsumption of oil in the Western economies, especially the United States, where Donald Trump loves oil and hates renewables. And the result is that Western countries, Western consumers, taking an advantage of the lower oil price, start increasing usage of oil. And that in turn eventually leads to an oil shortage, especially as the producers, worried about the oil glut, start to cut production. So in about a year's time, 2 years' time, we'll be back in an oil shortage again.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk a little bit about this ongoing China military drill around Taiwan, which that I do see a lot of reports. Okay, so China calls it the 2025 war game, or somebody calls it that. And this whole exercise is making this whole area effectively, the whole Taiwan island, effectively blocked almost all important shipping lanes, the airspace, and that will severely impacting cargo, passenger transportations, and flights and all that. Now, it's a military exercise. What the message is clear is that if we want to take Taiwan, we can take Taiwan any minute. right? Is that how you see it?
Absolutely. That is exactly what it means. And oh, my dog's coming. That is exactly what it means. It means precisely that very thing, that China has demonstrated again that it has overwhelming superiority in the area around Taiwan. Taiwan, of course, is a Chinese island, part of the Chinese Sea, the seas around China. So it's unsurprising that China, which is now unequivocally a great power, is in a position to build, to mount this kind of blockade. What China is in effect doing, in other words, is it's demonstrating its power to defend its coastline.
Now, the interesting thing is within the Taiwan island, supposedly the Taiwan government, leaders, they have been contacting Japan, for example. Remember, Takayuki said, if something happens to Taiwan, that would be survival threatening to Japan. Well, Japan hasn't done anything. Japan hasn't even said anything, obviously. And then Trump said, I'm not worried, which means I'm not going to take any action. That's how I interpret when he said, I'm not worried. Is that how?
Well, that is exactly. He's not going to take any action.
Okay.
Because he cannot take any action. I mean, the Americans are already doing things with Taiwan. They're providing Taiwan with weapons. And as we've discussed, they have a covert flow of weapons to Taiwan. But the US fleet is in no position to take on the Chinese Navy in the Taiwan Straits or anywhere close to Taiwan. Apparently, there have been endless numbers of war games conducted by the Pentagon, and they all come to the same conclusion. China wins.
And by the way, in terms of the arms sale to Taiwan, it's always like the arms sale to Ukraine. There's always a lot of corruptions going on, right? So the latest one, the 11 billion, my own guess is okay. Eventually, Taiwan will get something, but I doubt they will get everything. The reason is in the past that every time when there's a big, arms deal announced, the delivery is always years away. So I think there's a lot of both sides making money, individuals making money.
That is exactly true. I have no doubt. I mean, that's certainly been true in Ukraine. I've no doubt this is true about Taiwan. Can I just say something? Anybody in their senses in Washington should see that supporting secession in Taiwan is a loser. All it is doing is creating tensions with China. It goes against promises the United States made in the past, written promises the United States made in the past, and it puts the United States in a losing situation. It cannot defend Taiwan from China. It's setting the United States up for a military humiliation. So what is the rational, sane policy to pursue in the face of all of this? Negotiate with China about the eventual return of Taiwan to the homeland, the peaceful reunification of Taiwan, and do what the British, through gritted teeth, eventually had to do with Hong Kong, which is not such a very different scenario at the end of the day. Come along and tell the Taiwanese leadership, look, guys, we can't help you. This isn't working. You've got to come to terms with China, and you've got to do it fast, because at the end of the day, if there's a crisis, you're on your own. That is the rational foreign policy. The Americans never conduct rational foreign policies.
Well, part of it is, I mean, even in Taiwan, very few people believe if China mainland really want to take Taiwan, they had any chance. But it doesn't stop individuals from making money. You see, lots of times, all these arms sale, it's about individuals making money. They are the one who pushing for these deals, and they make huge amount of monies. And there's a scandal after scandal in Taiwan, which the West never covers. The latest one is a submarine project that started 10 years ago or something, 9 years ago. The project from the beginning, in that the president, Tsai Ing-wen at the time, she knew that Taiwan cannot build those submarines, so complex things. She knew that, but she still went ahead with it because she needed to give reward money to her supporters when she became the president. and her own parties and her own friends and families. So the whole thing now blow up because after billions of dollars, you throw in and there's nothing. The so-called Taiwan-made submarine, nobody dared, the so-called inspection team, nobody dared even to be on board. It was that bad.
So Ukraine, you're absolutely right. It's exactly like Ukraine. It's exactly like Ukraine. I mean, there was a missile system the Ukrainians were developing called the Flamingo, and it turns out it just doesn't exist, basically. I mean, it's so Ukraine. It doesn't surprise me at all. By the way, American allies always seem to end up like this. I mean, it's true. I mean, I remember it from South Vietnam. I remember, obviously, I saw it in Afghanistan. Where the Americans go, corruption always follows.
Yeah. Also, recently, Sullivan had an interview. I don't know if you looked. It was very interesting. So he talked about Taiwan, and he talked a whole bunch of things. Now, when he actually openly admitted remember Pelosi visited Taiwan. Now, first of all, he actually said he talked to Pelosi, which means it confirms at the time the Biden administration didn't want her to go, but she just saying, okay, I do whatever I want. And that seems like confirmed. And then his own assessment, he said, I believe the cost to Taiwan of that visit is far exceeded the benefit of that visit. So it's remarkable that he actually admitted that. I find that's interesting.
Jake Sullivan admitted that. Well, there you go. I mean, it's interesting. Okay. I mean, they could have spoken out publicly against it.
Exactly.
Of course they didn't.
Isn't that sad that he didn't say anything when he was in the government? It is absolutely. After he get out of it, he seems more honest about the whole situation.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the whole thing should be an object lesson to Taiwan, by the way, again. I mean, they host Nancy Pelosi, who comes with a lot of hot air and produces nothing tangible. And Taiwan's position overall is left worse. And who tells us this? Jake Sullivan, Joe Biden's national security advisor.
And the one thing I think the United States probably doesn't understand is that the U.S. like to slice the salami, right? Well, China can slice the salami too. So every time when the West are doing something provocative, China actually getting closer and closer. You see, now it's a full-scale surrounding, basically saying we can't block you any minute now. In the past, before Pelosi's visit, the China mainland voluntarily draw a line, the middle line between Taiwan and the mainland, saying for no apparent reason, of course, normally we wouldn't cross that middle line. But after Pelosi's visit, that line disappeared. Okay, it just no longer exists, and China just keep on doing military exercise.
Yes. I mean, there's going to come a point where they stop being exercises and become rehearsals. And again, I wonder whether this is well understood in the United States. Probably isn't.
No. They think they can slice the salami themselves, but other people can do it too, right?
Of course. But this is, you put your finger on it. The Americans find it very difficult to understand that others can do to them what they do to others. So, I mean, the fact that they get sanctioned by China and that this actually does have an effect, and that this is not just something that exists on paper, is something that is shocking to them. The fact that China can restrict rare earths when it's the US always that has acted to restrict technologies and the supply of technologies to others. Again, this is shocking to them and something completely unexpected. And the fact that China, as you rightly say, can engage in salami slicing, just as the Americans do, that is shocking too. In other words, that it creates facts on the ground which put it in a stronger position going forward, which is what the Americans love to do. Again, that also is shocking to them. But there it is.
I think the purpose for those slicing the salami is that people will more and more get used to this idea, right? And when you do it, again and again, and then when you have the final action, people would just say, okay, it is part of China. They can do whatever they want. So I think it's smart in that way that you don't just do it. Everybody was shocked, and because you do it so many times, then when you do it finally, the world would just accept that. I think that's probably is what's
I
going.
think there is some element of this. There's
Yeah.
the concept of boiling the frog.
Uh-huh.
That you
Yeah.
boil,
Yeah.
if you heat up the water too fast,
Yeah.
the frog will jump out. But if you do it gradually,
Yeah.
then it will stay in the water. So I think there's some truth in that
Yeah.
actually too. Yes.
And also, another thing he said in his interview was that he himself, he doesn't believe this win-win situation. I'm sure the Chinese has been, Chinese government has been telling him
Yeah.
many, many times, but he said deep down he doesn't believe that. He said deep down he didn't think even China believes it. On that point, I actually think I would agree with him. Here's the thing. Win-win situation requires both sides. You cannot be
Yeah.
win-win just the one side. But if the US declared China is the enemy, well, what's the choice China has other than making the US the enemy, right? Isn't it? Unfortunately.
Win-win assumes sanity and reason
Yeah.
on the part of both sides. What the
Yes.
Chinese are saying is, look, if we trade with each other in a fair and just way, you benefit, we benefit. This is a win-win for us. If we sort out the problems in the South China Sea and Taiwan, you benefit, we benefit. It's a win-win for both of us. We do not want to have zero-sum games where winner takes all. And we understand that those can be problematic, and we don't see statesmanship as searching to achieve zero-sum outcomes. We search to find win-win outcomes because that's what we believe diplomacy is. As I've discussed in many programs that we've done together, that is not the Western view.
No.
The Western view is that diplomacy, everything is about gaining leverage and success over the other side. So it is always zero sum. We keep Taiwan, even if nominally we accept a one China policy. The status quo continues indefinitely. You told me, you made that very point to me last time we spoke, that those who talk about preserving the status quo, what they're basically saying is that they want Taiwan to continue indefinitely as it currently is. I don't know whether you noticed, but I sent you some comments made by Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, in which he made exactly the point that you've just made, that when people talk about preserving the status quo on the Taiwan straits, they're not talking in good faith. They are really looking to gain advantage over China by keeping China, ultimately China, divided indefinitely. And that obviously is not a win-win. That is zero sum. But that is how Western leaders think, especially against a country that they've decided is a potential rival, is a potential adversary, which is China. So the Chinese have one way of approaching international affairs and diplomacy, and the West has a diametrically opposite one. And what Trump has just done, basically, is he's dropped the mask and he's told us what has been true about Western policy and American policy, specifically all along.
Yeah. And in China's case, China has to play based on this, because win-win requires two sides. But if you want to be zero-sum game, one side decided this is zero-sum game, you just have to participate. I mean, reluctantly.
Absolutely. I mean, every single meeting that Xi Jinping has had with American leaders, I mean, he's tried to explain this to them many times. And he explains at enormous length the advantage of win-win diplomacies. But I think that there will come a time, it probably has already, by the way, when China understands that you can explain this 1,000 times to the Europeans, and they will not listen, because they assume that everybody plays diplomacy in the same way that they do. So, I mean, given that this is so, there comes a point where there is no point wasting time any further trying to convert people to a point of view which they will never understand.
And that's probably also explained 2025, China is much more assertive, right?
Yes.
Because before that, China is still trying to be friendly, not doing too extreme things, right? But finally, China come to a point like, okay, it doesn't work. We cannot continue to just tolerate all these humiliations and sanctions and unreasonable punishment just because we are successful. So we have tools, we have cards. So yeah, we
Well,
can play that game
absolutely.
too.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we've talked in the past about this mythology about
Uh-huh.
wolf warriors and all of that,
Yeah, yeah.
who've never existed. I mean,
Mhm.
a number of Chinese diplomats who say things plainly, and this is considered aggressive. But you're absolutely correct. I mean, China has been very cooperative in the international system up to now.
Mhm.
From this moment on, it will indeed become more assertive
Yeah,
because it's been left with no option.
yeah, yeah. Before we get to talk about the Ukraine deal, let's just a little bit about the Cambodia Thailand ceasefire.
Mm.
I just want to point out you were correct. You said eventually China needs to come in and
Mm.
negotiate, helping them mediate. That seems like what happened. China did step in this time, and they
Mm.
have probably more sustainable peace deal. Do you agree?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And of course, the other thing, which perhaps I forgot to say, is that Donald Trump, when that happened, would take credit for it, which is exactly what is happening too. But there's no doubt at all. I mean, the Americans don't know how to do this any longer.
Mhm,
I mean, they sort of did once upon a time. China obviously does.
mhm.
Let's hope this time it sticks.
Yeah. So the Russian Ukraine peace deal, just like the Cambodia Thailand thing, I just feel like the whole problem with Trump's approach is it just want a very simple, like quick solution
Mm.
without looking deeper in the problem, right? So
Yeah.
what do you think it will happen? Because it seems like it's going to be a deal, but now it seems they were trying to assassinate Putin or something. What's
No,
going on here?
absolutely. Yeah. I don't think we're any closer to a deal than we have ever been. I mean, I
Okay.
think this is the thing to say. I mean, the Americans come up with all these ideas. What the Americans want to do, what their objective is, very simply, is to persuade the Russians to stop.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Because they know that if the Russians continue, the defeat, which is already visible to every objective person, is going to get worse and worse and
Hmm.
worse for them. I mean, it's going to become not just a defeat, but ultimately a cumulative, massive foreign
Hmm.
policy disaster. But they're not prepared to make the necessary concessions to the Russians. The Americans aren't. And the Ukrainians obviously will not make those concessions because the entire regime in Ukraine is constructed around a policy of being anti-Russian. So I mean they won't agree. I mean it is asking a tiger to become a mouse. I mean they can't do that. And the Europeans are now so deeply invested in this project, and they're very worried also always that the Americans and the Russians will come together and start making agreements about Europe without the Europeans. That they will do everything they possibly can to stop it as well. So we have negotiations that are simply, well, they're not even negotiations really. I mean, there's never been up to now proper negotiating teams sitting down every day, talking to each other,
Hmm.
exchanging ideas and briefing papers, having off the record discussions, searching for compromises, looking for ways forward. We never had anything like this. We've had people going off Golf, going to Moscow, having 5-hour chat with Putin, coming back to Washington, coming up with new ideas. There's some confusion sometimes about what exactly he's come back with,
Hmm.
sporadic meetings, all of this kind of thing. But nothing has ever really crystallized that can be described as a genuine settlement plan.
Hmm.
And when we ever seem to be moving slightly in that direction, the Ukrainians and the Europeans act to block it. So Trump's been wasting a huge amount of time on this. But if the objective is to gain peace in Ukraine, he is no closer. And if you listen to what the Russians are saying, they no longer believe it's ever going to happen. I mean, Putin's just had two important meetings with his generals just over the last couple of days.
Hmm.
And it's quite clear to me that he is mostly focused on winning the war.
Mhm. Trump, if he is so eager to end this war, why doesn't he listen carefully to, for example, what the Russian really wants? I mean, the Russian has said very clearly from the beginning, for example, no NATO membership for Ukraine. So far, I haven't even heard a guarantee for that. That
No,
seems like a simple thing to
no,
do, you know. And then, of course, denazification. I don't see anything
no,
has been done in that side, etc. So they haven't addressed any of the deep-rooted
no,
problem,
no.
but
It's a
still claim there's deal.
You are completely correct. You're absolutely correct. I mean, your point about root causes and never addressing root causes is absolutely correct. What they have been trying to do, because they don't want to look at the root causes, they don't want to discuss any of these difficult topics, because doing so would be very difficult for them as well. By the way, I mean, if they agree, for example, that Ukraine can never join NATO and should always be a neutral country, then they are in effect admitting that their entire foreign policy in Europe over the last 30 years has been an absolute disaster, which has led to this defeat. So this is psychologically something that is extremely difficult for them to do. So they don't want to do that, but they don't want the Russians to advance. So they're coming up with various proposals, which, when you unpack them, are basically ceasefire proposals, which, of course, the Russians have always rejected and immediately see through. I mean, whatever the Russians are, they are not stupid. They can tell what is a good deal and what is a bad deal and what doesn't make any kind of sense. But the Americans structurally cannot make the kind of deal that you mentioned. And I think part of the reason is that Trump himself is conflicted. He doesn't have the discipline to impose order on his administration in that way. There are many, many people in Washington who anyway disagree with the policy of trying to find a deal at all, and who still want to continue the war and still tell themselves that if we settle a few more weapons and a bit more money and tighten up sanctions a little bit more, finally we will get the successful outcome against the Russians that we have been saying we will get over the last 4 years. So the result is that the Americans have never been able to get their act together properly and come up with a real proposal that the Russians can work with. I am going to say one thing, and I think this is an important point to say, which is we get all this theatre, all this diplomacy, but if you actually look at what is happening, the direct American arms flow to Ukraine has dwindled to a trickle. And the direct American funding of Ukraine has dwindled to a trickle also. So if the purpose of these negotiations, this is altogether, by the way, too cunning for Trump, but if the purpose of these negotiations was just to conceal the fact that the United States is in fact stepping away from Ukraine, then you could argue in a kind of a sense that this diplomacy or this negotiations has served its purpose, because we're talking about abstract details of hypothetical plans when the reality is Ukraine is receiving less money and receiving less weapons. If the diplomacy wasn't happening, we would be talking about that, about the fact that Ukraine was receiving less money and fewer weapons. And that might be politically more difficult for Trump. I don't think, as I said, that Trump is doing this purposefully in that way, because I don't think he's that subtle. But it's just something to bear in mind.
Okay. Is it possible that Trump really need this ceasefire, or he calls peace deal, so that he won't be the one when he's the president that Ukraine will have a complete defeat? It will be
Yes,
on his
yeah.
watch.
In fact, I can tell you for an absolute fact that that is true. I mean, I have somebody who is in contact with people who are close to Trump, and who actually knows Trump himself. And he's told me that this is the thing that keeps Trump awake at night, that there's going to be another fall of Saigon moment while he's president. And this is really why he's spending all of this time in diplomacy, because he doesn't want that to happen.
But if, let's say, somehow he managed to force a deal, a so-called peace deal, that won't be sustainable. It probably will break up again. The two sides they can have a second fight, right? Isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it wouldn't last a year, as the Russians have repeatedly pointed out to him, and as he has on 2 occasions now admitted. So he admitted it in August. He's admitted it again a few days ago. But of course, everybody knows that sooner or later he'll be back to try to get the ceasefire again.
Now, going back to that interview with Sullivan, he also said something about the Ukraine war, which is one thing interesting caught my eyes, is he said that in the fall of 2022, when I think there was probably a brief period that Ukraine took back some land or something.
That's right.
And he somehow, according to him, they interpret that as Ukraine is fighting back, and Russia will not achieve what they wanted. And in reality, I mean, that would be interpreted as a Russian defeat if they fail to achieve what they're trying to achieve. And so they had a meeting in the White House, somehow contemplating or trying to discuss the chance, the the possibility of Russia is going to use nuclear weapons. And their conclusion is 50%. Now, I could have told them, 50%, because whatever happens, there could be a 50% chance. But then he also very quickly mentioned that they also contacted China for this. I guess they were trying to ask China to convince Russia not to use nuclear weapon or something. So there's that one detail I find interesting, but I find that they totally misjudged the situation back then, isn't it?
Absolutely. No, I should say that this story that the Russians were on the brink of using nuclear weapons in Ukraine in the autumn of 2022 has been very, very widely circulated. The Russians have categorically denied this. I mean, it's supposed to be based on intelligence information, but of course, intelligence can be wrong. And you're absolutely correct. I mean, the Americans completely misjudged the situation in autumn 2022. They thought Ukraine was going to win or might win. They thought Russia might lose. They were and they made all sorts of decisions and assumptions based on that basis. And they tried again to use China to try to put pressure on Russia. And I think they said that the Russians are about to use nuclear weapons and you must rein them in, thinking that would be, I suspect, the first step towards getting China involved to put pressure on Russia. It is interesting, whatever actually happened that autumn, that the United States found itself turning to China for help.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned this before. There's a very famous line by the British historian A.J.P. Taylor about the West and the Russians, that the West likes to use Russia as a tap that it can turn on and off whenever it likes. So, when the West has problems, like with Nazi Germany in the Second World War, or the Kaiser, or Napoleon, we're all friends with the Russians. But the moment the Russians have done their job, then, we go back to being hostile to them. And there is something like that starting to develop now. Same dynamic between the US and China. They use the Chinese, they want to use the Chinese to put pressure on the Russians. But they are not going to give China back anything in return.
They still think they're dominant to the world. The world will have to follow the orders from the United States and the West in general. Yeah, they still have that in mentality. Yes. Which is why it's so hard. Right now we're in this transition period that they're not used to the idea. You no longer dominate the world. You have to have respectful discussions. They don't do that.
No.
They refuse to do that. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so the Middle East is now in a I'm trying to figure out what's going on in Yemen. So the recent event, I think yesterday, right, that Saudi-led coalition, they airstruck the port city in Yemen. So they accused that there's some weapons sent by UAE to a group called the Sudden Transitional Council, STC. I didn't even know there's another. I thought Yemen is Yemen government and the Houthis, but then there's STC as well. So what is going on there?
Well, what is happening? I mean, I'm not a huge expert on the Yemen affair, but I mean, I can tell you straightforwardly, there are conflicts between the Arab states. I mean, the Arab states, all of them. I mean, we're talking about, when I talk about the Arab states, I mean the Gulf Arab states. At one level, they all look very similar. They have monarchies, they have all the regalia. They meet in the Gulf Cooperation Council. They're all allies. At another level, there are long-standing rivalries between them. So there's a long-standing rivalry between the Saudi Arabia and Qatar, for example. And there are rivalries also between the Saudis and the UAE. And what is basically happening is that in Yemen, these two countries are backing different factions, just as they are, by the way, in the civil war in Sudan.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Well, we will see. I mean, it seems like there's UAE, there's Yemen, there's Saudi, and then behind them also, of course, there's always the US, China, Russia, and in this case, EU and some India. You know, there's
there's many complex players. I think one thing to say is that all of these states that you see in the Gulf are very recent constructs. They are basically creations of the British. The British, after the First World War, were the dominant power in the Middle East. And they divided up the Middle East between themselves and the French. They gave Syria and Lebanon to the French. They kept Egypt and Palestine for themselves. And the rest of the Middle East, they divided mostly between two families, the Hashemites, who were in charge in Iraq and Jordan, and the Saudis, who were in charge of the Arabian Peninsula. And to keep the ports around the Gulf, the Gulf ports, open, which is very important for the British, who at that time were the major naval and economic power. The British set up all of these little emirates on the Persian Gulf, and they also kept a big military base in South Yemen, in Aden, and they basically created Yemen. So they played on, well, people are called them tribes, but you know, the groups, the clan groups that exist in this region. So this, of course, has no real isn't based on the real loyalties of the people in these particular regions. So places like the UAE, Qatar, and whatever, they have worries about their legitimacy and their authority. They're also very nervous of the Saudis, which is a much older dynasty, by the way, going all the way back to the 18th century. And so they don't want Saudi Arabia to become overly dominant and too strong. And so, you know, they play all these little games with all of these little movements in the places. And these conflicts are always there under the surface at some level.
Yeah, another one is the Somali and the Somaliland, right?
Exactly.
Can you explain that? Also, I didn't even know that Somali is two Somaliland. One belongs to the British, the other belongs to Italy. They put together or something. So now one part is declared independence.
That's right. So there was British Somaliland,
Okay.
And there was the Italian Somali area, and of course there's Djibouti, which the Somalis also claim as part of Somalia. So after decolonization in the 60s, Italian Somalia and British Somalia united and became for a short time a socialist, or at least socialist aligned state, allied with the Soviet Union. And then things began to go wrong. They quarreled with the Soviets over all sorts of things I'm not going to get into details of. It began to evolve into a dictatorship. The dictatorship itself collapsed. Then there was major insurrection and violence, and the two different parts of Somalia broke away, and there's Italian Somalia, and there's the other Somalia, and they're not very friendly with each other. And there are many conflicts, and there's no stable government in any one of these places. And again, what you've started to see is that this territory has become very much a place where the various Arab states, the Somalis, I should say, are Muslims. It's a Muslim region. The Arab states are now very heavily involved in competition with each other, supporting one Somali faction against another Somali faction, and whatever. There is also here a geopolitical aspect, because, as you know, China has a presence. I think it's in Djibouti, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
They have a naval base. So important, therefore, that China does not gain further influence in Somalia. So this is, so you can see the Americans are also there too. The British, of course, are there too, because, you know, they were the former colonial masters. And of course, there's also the worry about the Russians, who are also perhaps going to open a base in Sudan. And that must be prevented at all costs. So the result is that these unhappy people who live in this region are never left alone, and the tensions grow, and they are always pawns in other people's chess games.
So the latest one is Israel recognizes Somaliland, and I think the African Union and most Arab countries are not happy about that, because they accuse Israel do this so that they could push all the Palestinians to Somaliland.
Yes.
So that's what's going on.
Well, that's not impossible. I didn't know that, by the way, but that's not at all impossible. I mean, there are some people in Israel who no doubt are thinking in that way. I should say that Somaliland is mentioned in the Bible. And we know that they spend a lot of time worrying about what's in the Bible in Israel. So there may be some element of that too. But the other thing I have to say is that, you know, if the Israelis can establish some kind of presence in Somaliland, then they have a presence in the Red Sea and the Arabian Gulf and all of that. So or the Arabian Sea rather, not the Arabian. So that there may be strategic military implications for this as well, which would also not be popular with either the African Union or the Arab countries.
Yeah, and the UN Security Council, there are right now 15 members, except the US. They all condemn this Israel's recognition of Somaliland.
Well, there you go.
Because it's a violation of the Somalis, you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. I mentioned to you, right, that there is a big discussion in the Chinese social media about this Killline. Now, this concept is not new. In the US, there has been a lot of numbers showing you that there's not that many people have a big reserve, you know, savings. It's, I think 2/3 of them, they living paycheck to paycheck, and probably 59% of the Americans do not have savings more than $1,000, which means that they are just one accident away from being bankrupt, even though they have jobs, probably even, you know, well-paid jobs, but since there's no saving, if something happens, they immediately can go to bankruptcy. The reason it got so much attention is somehow somebody gave it a name. They called it Killline, and that shocked everybody. So what is your view on that? Is Europeans, are they better protected compared to the US?
Well, they are better protected in one respect, in that we have much more sophisticated and extensive welfare systems in Europe. So you're not going to become bankrupt in Europe if you fall ill. I mean, that's the first thing to say. I mean, if you fall ill, you're not going to become bankrupt. There's many more job protections. So you can't be as easily sacked from your job as you are in the United States. There's more payoffs. There's also much more generous social security. Having said that, the fact that the people have very low savings, and they do, by the way, I mean, this in Britain, catastrophically low. Germany used to be better, but it's becoming less so now. Well, that obviously does also create a degree of fragility in the system, because people don't want to be reduced to being beneficiaries of state charity. And there's also the worry that if there is a major crisis, many people get out of work, lose their jobs, lose their homes, they will look to the state for help. And given that the state of finances in Europe is very poor, that could break the states in Europe too, because they won't be able to afford to give the kind of generous social provision that they are at the moment. So this does exist. It does create enormous strain in Britain, certainly in Britain, and in Greece, where I know about it. Maybe it's not as acute as it is in the United States, but it is certainly there.
Yeah, and yeah, like even in my program, I talked about this before, and there are plenty of people who talk about this, but I think it's caught up by this name, this Killline. I think people in China, lots of them just simply shocked, like you're the wealthiest country in the world. How can you allow big portion of your population is living struggle like this? It is a struggle. It is to stay above this kill line. It is for a lot of people. It is a struggle.
Well, it is. It is. I mean, I think what people in China perhaps ought to be aware is that the dominant school of economic thought in the West, dominant since the 1970s, advocates for this. I mean, they believe that this is the best and most optimal way of achieving economic efficiency, of keeping people working and accepting low wages. Whereas in China, of course, I think it's completely, the setup is completely different. But in the West, as I said, there is a widespread, I mean, this is almost the economic orthodoxy, that this is the best way.
And if you just look at the US system, I was thinking, right, like if I put a savings like in the bank, the interest rate I pay taxes on it. But if I borrow money, the interest I pay to the bank, that is deductible. So it's almost discourage you from saving, encourages you. The tax system at least encourages you to borrow money.
To borrow,
right?
that's right. Yes,
Yeah.
It does the same. It's exactly the same here. I mean, in Britain, everybody is in debt to some degree.
So so there is some fundamental system problems, right? Even though I can see, okay, your interest rate is your income, so any income you need to pay tax. I can see that, but still, I just feel like the system set up in a way that they don't want to see people have a lot of savings.
No. Well, that's right. I think that's absolutely true. As I said, to repeat again, the system is actually designed in this way. And one other effect, of course, it has, is that all of these people who are working so hard are working very hard to keep a few people very rich. And at the same time, they're experiencing, the people who are working hard are experiencing all that insecurity that the very rich people don't suffer from. Marx, just to say this again, talked about all of this. I mean, he predicted that something rather like this would happen. And by the way, I should say I don't have enough knowledge of Marx to be a Marxist myself, but I've read Marx quite well. But I mean, he describes all this very, 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 very intelligently. And he also describes how capitalism, Western capitalism, the Western system of capitalism rests on exploitation. Now, what you're describing is exploitation. In the West, it is a very, very long time, decades, since I saw that word exploitation appear in any article about economic policy.
And also, I think that also when you design a system like that, you do give a lot of power to banks, right?
Yeah.
They control all people's finance when you borrow from them, right?
Yes.
So they have something in their hands that they can tight anytime if the interest rate is going up, and immediately lots of people will be struggling. Interest rate goes down. Okay, immediately people will go out spending. It's giving a lot of power to the banks. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, it puts creditors in a much stronger position. Creditors, by definition, are rich people, and at the core of them are the banks.
Okay, so Julian Assange, my hero, I really very much admire him. He now sues the Nobel Peace Committee. I would say yes. Okay, so his argument is Maria Machado, right, the Venezuela Nobel Peace Prize winner. She clearly is aiding and supporting war effort towards her own country, and yet this woman is being awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. I find that's remarkable that Nobel Peace Prize would do that, but even more remarkable after somebody is suing the Nobel Peace Committee. So I celebrate that.
So do I. I hope he wins. I'll be very interested to see whether he does. I understand that the Alfred Nobel Foundation, which is in Sweden, are furious about this award and have also complained about this. And they said that it violates every principle of that that Alfred Nobel set out when he set up the prize. So I hope he wins, and I hope they come along and support him in this.
Can we say now if they do win, I mean that would be a big setback for the Nobel Peace Prize in general, I think. Can we say that more and more these kind of Western established institutions are weakening, are in trouble?
Yes, they are. They are very obviously weakening. As the West is weakening, it is over relying upon them, and it is discrediting them. Once upon a time, the United States would have known better than to get the Nobel Peace Prize committee to award someone like Machado the Peace Prize. I mean, it would have tried to keep it distant. So from someone like Machado, the better so as to embarrass the Chinese and the Russians when it awards absolutely poisonous peace prizes to people who are activists, for subverters, whatever it is that they do there. But now they've lost that skill. They've fallen into the trap of overusing it, and well, we see the result.
And what happened to Huang Guaido? For a while, their guy was Huang Guaido, right? Nobody remembers him. They changed.
Nobody does. No, of course not. I mean, he became, they will recognize him as president of Venezuela. I don't know whether they still do, by the way. And if they don't, then the British ought to return all the gold reserves to Venezuela because they seized the gold reserves on the grounds that Maduro was not the illegitimate president of Venezuela, but that Guaido was. So
that's ridiculous. That's which is why China also started to doing the service for people to put gold in China now.
Yes.
I mean, why would you put your gold in Britain now that they could just seize it and
well, this is something else that China needs to be aware of because Chinese people need to become aware of because it's going to become the world's depository. I mean, the depositories in Europe, Euroclear and Clearstream, are discredited now. And this attempt to seize the Russian assets has especially discredited them. So China now is setting up depositories, and more people from around the world are going to be putting their money there.
Yeah, because you can't trust them. I mean, through their own actions, you can't trust them.
Exactly.
Okay, looking 2026. There are a few things, I guess we already know. So supposedly we will see Trump will visit China in April. That's a big thing. And then, of course, the U.S. midterm election. Is it going to be the Democrat is going to gain a lot of seats and Republicans going to lose a lot?
At the moment, it does indeed look like that because of the situation in the economy. But the Democrats have every ability, it seems to me, to mess up. And I can't help but think that as we get closer and closer to the midterms, not only are they likely to do so, but that they're going to remind a lot of people in the US why they voted against them in the first place. So I'm not myself at this moment in time predicting a Democrat landslide in the midterms. I mean, it's possible. I'd not have my finger on the pulse in America in the same way. But there are so many problems in the US political system that whatever happens, it's going to become more unstable because America is in retreat. And as you've made said on several times in this program, it doesn't know how to deal with it. It can't absorb that fact.
More and more, I feel like Trump's group, I mean, his team, they're not very competent people.
No.
They're so bad that even with the Epstein file, they put black on all the things, right? They redact them. But even those redactions, lots of people are saying it's not very hard to see what's under there. You use some simple tools, copy and paste.
Yes.
So they cannot even get that right. They can't do that right.
Correct.
They're so incompetent people.
Yeah, they are very incompetent. I mean, the contrast between the government of China and the government of the United States is exceptional at this time, far greater than I think people in China understand.
Yeah, I mean, people just constantly being surprised by, like this Killline. I think lots of people generally shocked. They're like, how can you do that, right? That you're the richest. Again, United States is supposed to be the richest country in the world, and you would allow your population to suffer like that. It's just one more thing is Greenland. What do you think will happen to Greenland? Why is Trump kind of cannot get rid of this idea? Just keep on going back to Greenland.
Well, I mean, we come back to the fact that America is in retreat, and it has to do big theatrical performances to persuade everybody that it's still strong. And so, if you can't win in Ukraine and you can't win in Taiwan, well, take over Greenland. I mean, it's really big. It's a big, wide area of your northeastern coast. And, you can say that, now you've got a big presence in the Arctic and all of that. And you're actually now the biggest country in the world, because Canada, the US, and Greenland together is going to be even bigger than Russia is. And, so, I mean, so this is, it's again another symptom of decline. It's and this is why the Americans are now, and it's not just Trump now. And by the way, I've noticed it's more and more Americans talking about Greenland and that this is the way forward this is what the US needs to do. And of course, it's all focused again on the new Monroe Doctrine, withdrawing into our sphere of influence, keeping those bad people from China away, all of this, establishing our presence in the Arctic. You have all of these rationalizations, but it's all ultimately a display of power, of fading power. There's a very famous Arab writer from about the 14th century called Ibn Khaldun. And he said it very well. He said, look, at the end of every empire, there is usually actually he said at the end of every dynasty, there is usually a display of power. And you see this, it's like the candle. Before it goes out, sometimes the flame bursts more brightly. And that is taken by some people as a sign of recovery, when in fact, what it really means is that the light is about to go out. The flame is about to go out. And I think the Greenland affair is another example of this.
And instead of, I really think Trump should be focusing more domestically, like how to get rid of this kill line, how to give people a little bit better protection than the current system is. I guess he's just incapable of doing that, I guess.
This is the trap of empire. When countries become empires, the focus of the political leadership is the empire itself, and they lose sight of what's going on domestically, and they can't ever pull themselves away. You're absolutely correct. Trump should be spending far less time on foreign policy, focusing instead entirely on domestic policy. But the affairs of empire draw him back, and they will his successors. So that's why China will that's why China will continue to develop, because it's not an empire, whereas the United States will not.
Yeah, and I find also even within Trump, his own team, his own administration, I find there's so many factions, right? There's Rubio want to do something in Venezuela, and then there is people who still want to continue the war in Ukraine, and then of course go targeting Iran, and of course eventually all will go to China. I mean, there seems like a lot of factions that he cannot make up his own mind in many cases?
Well, this is also a structural problem in the way that the US government is organized, because it places too much responsibility in the hands of one person, who is the president. Even if the president was an extremely capable, hardworking president, he wouldn't be able to supervise the entire bureaucracy and foreign policy apparatus in the way that the Constitution requires him to do. More successful countries have far more structured political systems. So in China, you have the Standing Committee of the Politburo, you have the Politburo itself, you have the Secretariat, the Central Committee, the government, the State Council, all of these different things, all of which interconnect and work and complement each other. So you have a structured government with a clear process for making decisions. America has never had that at any point in its history. American governments, even the most efficient, successful American governments, administrations, have always been administratively ragged, and they are becoming more so as I said, decline intensifies, with eccentric personalities like Biden, who is asleep most of the time, and Trump, who is, well, Trump. It's going to get worse.
Yeah, Trump is hyper all the time, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Biden sleeping all the time. Okay.
Exactly.
Thank you so much for
and we'll speak again next week. Have a very good holiday tomorrow.
That will be next year we speak. Okay. Happy holidays.
Happy
Bye.
holidays. Bye.